All right, everybody. All right, everybody, welcome to our call today. My name is Matt Halsey, and today we're going to talk about how to actually get more calls than you can handle. So the idea of sales, obviously, let me back up a little bit. So really what we're going to do today, what's going to set apart this call from any other training that you've ever had before is, number one, we're going to do the exact opposite of pretty much everything you've been taught. And behind that, we're going to teach you how to actually get people to start calling you, which is something that I was never taught how to do. But when I learned how to do it, and it was just honestly by total luck, it really changed everything. And the results went through the roof. So that's what we're going to go through today. If you have any questions, email me along the way or put something in the chat box. But let's go ahead and get started. Everything that you've been taught about sales is wrong. It's absolutely Hey everybody, my name is Matt Halsey. I'm a part of a company called the Sales Cheat Code, and today we're going to talk about how to actually get more calls that you can handle. Now, contrary to what most of us have been told, if you're going to do really well in sales, it's not about work ethic, it's not about the number of calls you make, it's not about the product, the sales cycle, anything about that. It's really about how many people are actually calling you, seeking out your product. And today we're going to show you how to get more people calling you than you can handle. And what I mean by that is get more people calling you than you have time to call back, which means your voicemail is going to back up and back up and back up if you're doing what I'm talking to you about. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions, go ahead and email them to me, or you can put them in the chat box, but we'll go ahead and start our prezo. Everything that you've been taught about sales is wrong. Flat out, it's wrong. The reason is that the people that you have been taught, the people who have taught you about sales were never good at sales. They weren't. In fact, most of the people that I knew that were sales trainers, knowing them before they were actually in their training role, they were not good at sales. In fact, the last place that I was at where I was doing sales, the person who did the training, her name was Molly. She actually sat next to me. She was on my team for a while, and she was the second worst person on my team. Now, the worst person just didn't care. I mean, she was mailing it in every day. At least Molly was trying, but Molly was not good at sales. But it comes a point in time when you're on a sales team that you're either going to do well, hit your goals, or you're going to get written up and, as we say, coached out. And you have a choice at that point. Do you want to actually keep paying your rent and your mortgage, or do you want to basically have to decide where you're going to live? And so you're either going to leave the company and get written up and coached out, or you can decide to pull the parachute, try to transfer out, and land another spot in the company. Where most people land when they do that, when they're bad in sales, is when there's a training opportunity. They move to training. So you get people training you who really don't know what they're talking about. They weren't good in sales. Everything that they're telling you, they know in fact didn't work. And yet they're telling it to you as this supposed authority, as if you're supposed to believe them. But if you actually ask them how they did in sales, it wasn't very good. And as just a confirmation of that, if you look at somebody who's making a standard salary sitting 40 hours a week in a training room, why would they possibly give up all this money that they've been making in sales to sit in a classroom making a standard salary? It's not going to happen. Now, this training that you've been taught, it's actually costing you big time. So it's not about, well, I've been taught the wrong thing, I can help overcome it. But what it actually starts to do is it actually starts to cost you three very important things: money, time, and morale. So it's going to cost you money because there's people who are not obeying this training. The people that are doing some of the things that I'm teaching you today, who are going to make a lot more money than you are based on doing what we're talking about. On the other hand, you could be that person if you want and be making more money than the people who are just mindlessly following some trainer that doesn't know what they're talking about. It's also costing you time because you're going to spend most of your time, if you're not doing this, cold calling and prospecting and just calling off lists and maybe even networking depending on your business model. But you're actually taking time away from yourself. And in the end, the morale hit is when you start to really question whether or not you're meant for this, and you start to blame yourself and think it's all your fault. And most of the people think it's all your fault. They think it's all their own fault because, well, everybody's telling it to them. Their manager's telling them it's their fault, and they look at all the people on their team who are doing well, and they can't blame it on the leads or anything external like that because there are people doing well. So they can't look themselves in the face and say that. So much like the scene in an office space, they just want to take the bat to that printer, and they start to really beat themselves up inside. Now, the typical sales process, we've all been taught, basically encompasses a number of things. It encompasses cold calling, and the reason it's there is because, well, nobody's calling you, so you have to call people. And by the very definition, they call it cold calling because you don't have any better leads. It's not called warm calling or lukewarm calling. If you get to a point where you're cold calling, it's because you literally have hit the bottom of the barrel. It involves overcoming objections, which I am a massive advocate against, because if somebody is telling you no for a reason, it means no. I mean, if a woman tells a man no, it means no. So when, if you're standing there with a salesperson and they offer you something and you tell them no and you get an objection, 99.9% of the time you're not going to change your mind. It's just so being at a place in a typical sales process involves starting from a really bad place where people are giving you objections. Trying to build rapport, which to me is really smarmy. If you have one person that's unilaterally trying to be friends with another person, but that other person is not reciprocating, well, in sales they call it building rapport, but in the real world they call it being greasy-handed or being smarmy. We've all been taught that benefits sell, but we know that's not true, because if you had a product and all you did is just rattle off the list of benefits, everybody would buy. Well, if it worked, but we all know that that does not work. We've been taught to always be closing, to always, if we're talking to somebody, always probe or actually officially try to close. But realistically, it gets to a point where the other person feels like they're being hunted. We've been taught that we always have to start from a no. In other words, we got to turn a no to a yes, which the underlying assumption on that is you're starting from a no. But today we're going to talk about exactly why you don't need to do that and how to actually start from a yes. We've been taught to chase people, and I just don't believe that. If you have to chase people, something is wrong. And we've also been taught that we need to defer to strangers for the sake of a buck. And what I mean by that is we're going to go out of our way to do what somebody else that we've never met before asks us to do just for the sake of a buck. So, they're going to tell us, hey, I'm not available right now. Can you call me at 2? Sure, I'll call you at 2. But yet we're not going to do that with anybody else in our life. I mean, we have a life, we have a calendar, we have priorities in our life, and yet we'll do anything to try to please somebody or assuage them, which ironically was a word of the day in our family today, so I got to tell them that I use that just for the sake of making money. And that is borderline prostitution in my book. And in the end, really what the sales process tells us to do is to look out for ourselves first, which people can sense that. People can sense when you're starting and you're basically looking out for yourself first, which means you're not looking out for their interests, which means they figure that out and they don't want no part of it because they know you're going to get more out of whatever encounter than they will. And who wants to be a part of that? And in the end, I call that hope marketing. In other words, you're just doing a whole bunch of things. There's no strategy. There's no leverage. There's no negotiation. There's nothing that you're doing that works for you. But in the end, you just hope it works. Now, why doesn't it work? Well, people don't trust you. Now, nobody tells you that in sales. Nobody's ever told me that in any sales training that I ever did. But in the end, people just don't trust you. And why should they? I mean, you're selling something, you're going to get money out of the encounter, and they're going to pay money. So 99, well, I shouldn't say 99, but 9% of the time, if we buy something off somebody we've never met before, the odds are either we're going to feel like we got screwed or we're going to feel like we got screwed. And when that happens, you're not going to get burned the second time. So you're not going to allow people to get over on you. And so you end up having this very distrustful attitude, which honestly makes sense. I mean, that is a natural reaction. People also see what you're doing. They've seen sales processes before. They've seen people set up a close. They've seen people try to basically set you up for a sales appointment or whatever it is. And when you look at timeshares, it's the same thing. When you meet somebody, let's say you're out and somebody has a table set up and you're looking for something, and the minute you see timeshare, you realize, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here right now, because people know what's coming. And no matter what industry you're in, if you've been the potential customer for them, you might get hit the first time and not see what it's coming, but the second time you will. And a good example of this is when I was actually buying windows. I actually used to do this for a living, so I was on both sides of the encounter. You have somebody come in, you don't really know what to expect, and you get this really hard, pushy close. And you didn't see it coming, so it's not your fault. But then you knew that, wait a minute, I'm getting 3 estimates. So I've gone through 1, and this first experience sucked. It was terrible. And I have 2 more to go. Oh my gosh, that's just not going to work. So the second and third one, they see what you're doing is coming, and they're very, very defensive. People are also very oppositional. They're oppositional by nature. If I come up to you and say, I'm smarter than you, the first thing you're going to say is, no, you're not. If I tell you that I'm better than you at something, no, you're not. If I tell you that, my product is awesome, you're going to say, no, it isn't. I mean, it's nothing more than a teenage girl. You can tell them anything, but they're going to find something to say in opposition. So when you're telling them something in the typical process about, hey, these benefits are great, the first thing they're thinking in their head, whether they say it to you or not, is, no, you're not. No, the benefits are not that. It does not that great. And so you're really just approaching the situation from the wrong way. In the end, everyone is defensive. So you have somebody in what I call a karate stance. What I mean by that is that they're basically not going to let you win. They stake out a defensive position. They're in there to protect themselves, their wallet, and their ego, and they're not ever going to let you win. They will fight to the death. But more than anything, one of the reasons it doesn't work is you're talking on the conscious level. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we try to logic people into a sale. We try to talk to them about specs and prices and price comparisons and discounts and price matches and all these things that seem to make sense on the conscious level, but every decision that's ever made when it comes to sales is always made on a subconscious level. It's based on fears or hopes or something where you're appealing to somebody's subconscious mind. So it could be their ego, it could be a fear of loss, it could be wanting to be associated with somebody famous, it could be anything like that. But you're really waging the battle on the wrong level. One of the other things is I call it Jurassic Park food. And what I mean by that is that people always want to hunt for something. So we can sit here and try to make it as easy as possible for somebody to buy. We could meet them when and where we want to meet them. We could make the process super easy. But in the end, if you remember the movie Jurassic Park back in the day, they end up trying to feed this Tyrannosaurus Rex, this goat, I think. And they just laid the goat in his pen. But T-Rex didn't want the food. He wanted a prey. He wanted something to hunt. And so a lot of times people want something to hunt. I know with my wife, for example, she's not about shopping and getting a good deal. She wants a discount. She wants to come home and brag that it was this much and I got it for this much, or I talked him down 60% or whatever it is, but it's a sense of conquest that people want. But when you make it super easy for them and you simplify the process and you're basically just spoon feeding them something, people aren't going to respond. And in the end, we all have preconceived notions. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, these preconceived notions are really important because they really define the battlefield. They define how people think of things and how you think of things. So while you're talking about your product and its features and its benefits and its price and your service and all the different things that go about it and your reputation and your Yelp score and all whatever, Angie's List, or all the different things that go into what you do, there is a whole undercurrent of activity happening that is really deciding everything that's going to happen. So for example, we're going to talk about our preconceived notions. So let me change this up a little bit. I'm just closing something out. All right, there we go. Our preconceived notions. So you might have somebody who is an attorney, and their preconceived notions is they have no integrity, they're sleazy, they're a liar, they're a cheat, and they're a thief. Much like Saul Goodman, although it's a little bit different for him. But in a sense, that when we look at an attorney, that's the first thing that we think about. When we think about a politician, they're corrupt, they're a liar, they're bought off, they're insincere, or they're selfish. When we look at salespeople, they're pushy, needy, they're a dime a dozen, they're always going to be salesy, and we really don't need them. Or we look at the used car salesman, they're sleazy, they're a liar, they're sneaky, they're pushy, and they're going to cheat you. You know you're going to get screwed one way or another on these people. But let's look at your preconceived notions. When you look at a doctor, you look at the fact a lot of people just assume they're really intelligent, they're honest, they're careful, they're helpful, and they're trustworthy. Police officers, they're fair, they're brave, they're community-oriented, they're dedicated and dependable. When we look at pharmacists, they're conservative, honest, careful, helpful, trustworthy, and independent. So, we automatically have things that are baked in positively and negatively when we look at different groups of people. So when you have somebody that's coming up to you, if you're, let's say, for example, you're selling life insurance, the first thing that they're going to think is that you are maybe pushy, needy. They're definitely going to think you're a dime a dozen. I mean, they can summon 100 of you at any given time at the snap of a finger. And for life insurance, they don't really feel that it's needed. They can buy it whenever they want, off of who they want, and the price is probably going to be relatively the same. So, we need to look at that and know that the people that we're talking about have these initial conceptions of us. So we're not starting from zero, we're starting from like negative 200 depending on your industry. And so what we have to do is we have to deconstruct this before we get there, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. All right, in the end, there has to be a better way. I mean, there has to be. I mean, how do you possibly do well if you have to basically overcome all these roadblocks, in a sense, these stumbling blocks? And yet there are people that do incredibly well in sales, which means they're deconstructing these, and we're going to talk about exactly how to do that. Now, my background, I have 20 years in sales in multiple industries. I've been around for a long time, and I've done I've done sales in a lot of different areas. I've run sales teams for several Fortune 500 companies. So, it's not some little small hardware store where I'm teaching people how to sell, 2x4s. I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the United States. And I currently teach salespeople and business owners how to get more customers than they can handle within a few months. And that is literally true. You get more customers than you can physically handle. In other words, you're going to have to either turn away business or you're going to have to redesign your customer onboarding process. And to have that be a reality in a few months. So whether you're brand new, you've never done sales before, or you've been absolutely terrible and struggled and questioned whether this was your long-term type of job scenario, we can change that and get you more customers than you can possibly handle within a few months. And I know that because that's exactly what I did. All right, now my real background. My background right here, this is what I like to tell people, but let me tell you about my real background. I used to suck at sales. So for those of you thinking, oh, this guy's always been good, I'm not like him, he doesn't understand me, well, no, I do. In fact, my first sales job, I never made a sale. I was there for 3 months. That was when I was doing home improvement, doors, windows, siding, roofs, all that fun stuff. And I literally made 0 sales. In fact, the only commission that I ever made was I literally was out on this call with this guy, and I literally sat in the background, didn't say a thing, and he ended up closing the sale, and he gave me half his commission. That was the only commission that I ever made. The best thing that I ever did was that I actually lasted 3 months. And then, yes, I did get fired. And in the end, I only made it and succeeded because I worked harder and longer hours than anybody else. So even in the other sales jobs I had, I was just white-knuckling it and blue-collaring it. That's how I used to call it, blue-collaring it. just to barely get by. But man, I worked crazy hours. Sometimes I worked close to 80 hours a week, and just worked harder than anybody else when I was there because I had to. I didn't have a choice. And a lot of the time, I was just trying to defer the getting written up process and getting fired process, which honestly didn't always work. Because when you suck at sales, you're eventually going to get written up and you're eventually going to get fired. And I am the epitome of that. Now, my background in actually learning how to be good at sales, well, I learned how to crush it, but not from mainstream sales training. I mean, I tried. I read probably every author you can imagine. I tried every type of sales approach you can think of, but it never worked until I came up with a model that I designed myself. And in fact, oh, sorry, let me go back here. Anyway, all right. But in fact, this training did me more. But I learned how to crush it in sales, not from mainstream. Now my background in actually starting to be good in sales is I learned how to crush it, but not from mainstream sales training. I tried every possible training module you can imagine. I read every sales book or books by every author you can imagine. I tried every system you can imagine, but it never worked. And in fact, the training did me more harm than good because it just crushed my morale. The more times I tried something new and it just didn't work, it really made me feel like that all these people couldn't be wrong. There's one commonality between what all these authors and all these books and all these strategies and me is that it had to be me because everybody else seemed to be doing well. All these authors and people teaching these systems seemed to be doing well, but I couldn't do it. So I figured, well, the commonality is me. And my guess is it's probably the same thing for you too. But this all changed back in 2006. And this is basically where I came to a point where I realized that the mainstream sales model was not going to work really well. But I did have a professional advertising and marketing background. And so one of the things that I did is I just got sick of not getting people calling me. And I just realized that if I kept doing the same thing that I was doing, that I was just going to have the same results. And, you know, I really liked the company that I was working for, so I didn't want to get written up or fired. And so I ended up coming with this model that we're going to be talking about today. And the idea, it wasn't that I figured out, oh, this is how I'm going to get all these phone calls, people calling me, because I didn't really think that was going to happen. But it was one of these things where I really realized, knowing how I understand psychology and sociology and how the things that I worked on and learned in advertising and marketing helped me design this. And at the same time, I was actually in this underground pickup group where we were actually not picking up girls, but we were getting girls to pick us up. And so one of the things that I quickly realized is these people that I was talking to, they were, when I did get somebody on the phone, they were acting and reacting the same way that these girls that we would meet react to guys that were out. And I quickly realized I had this amazing realization rather, is that I thought, well, I wonder if I just ditched everything I ever learned about sales training and just did what I know that I do outside of work, which would get these women to automatically want to start talking to you, where you didn't have to pursue them, but they would actually start pursuing you. And so I really didn't think it was going to work. I really wasn't sure that it was going to work much at all. But I just was looking at on paper and I thought, well, it has to work. I mean, it all lines up, but it can't be that easy, right? But then I was looking ahead and I was looking at this road ahead of me where I'm just wearing myself to the bone, eventually going to get written up and fired. And I thought, well, there's nothing for me to lose, so I might as well do it. And so in the end, I really started to crush it. I started to get people calling me like crazy. And so today we're going to talk about exactly the thing that I did in literally that day and the couple days that followed, where I basically designed a system that got my phone ringing. And you got to understand, I worked at an outbound call center, so our whole job was to be the ones making all the calls. And yet I was the only person in the company where I spent all my time fielding inbound calls, to a point where my manager looked at it and I was the lowest person. I mean, they kept the list for everything, and I was dead last on number of outbound calls made in the whole company. And it wasn't close. Like, whoever was second last wasn't even near me. I was solidly in last place. And yet I was one of the top 3 to 5 people in the company as far as total sales and people that stayed with us and referrals and pretty much every metric that you could imagine. So in the end, what I'm going to help you do is I'm going to help you get more customers than you can handle and to do it in a few short months. Now, you can actually do it faster. I did this in a matter of a month. But just for people, I assume that not everybody's going to get the same results as me. You can, at the very least, get it in a very few months. But think about that. A couple of months from now, a few months from now, to have more customers than you handle, more customers than you can handle. I mean, just the dynamic of that right now, yeah, I mean, it's just like a lot of you are just thinking that's crazy, but it's an absolute reality. And I know that because I have hundreds of people that I've taught this to from very different backgrounds. I mean, I've taught people who used to be ministers, software designers, photographers, pretty much anybody can, that you can imagine. I've taught them how to do this. So how do you do it? Well, in order to get more calls than you can handle, you need to get tons of inbound sales calls. I mean, it's really as simple as that. So you need to get your phone ringing instead of you having to chase people all the time. From there, you need to convert those calls into customers. I mean, obviously, you get 35 calls coming in, instead of going 0 for 35, you want to be able to convert those into customers and do it at a high rate. And then from there, you want to get this process to go on autopilot without having to make any calls. So it's not about just consistently revving the engine. It's about revving the engine once and getting that sucker on autopilot so that people are going to call you without you having to even call them. I mean, it sounds crazy. People are going to call you, people you've never met before. They're not on your list. You have no clue who they are, and yet they're going to call you asking to do business with you. It's as simple as that. So in the end, how do you get more tons? I put that in the presentation here. We're going to have to change that for next time. Tons of inbound sales calls. Well, you design a voicemail that can get a 50% callback rate. It's that simple. The voicemail formula, the formula to design these voicemails I had kept the numbers, and I had a 50% callback rate, which means if I called 20 people, 10 people responded back to me. I mean, it's crazy. So I was sitting here watching people make 300 calls a day, and they'd be lucky to get 2 people calling back. And yet I'm calling, let's say I called 20 people a day, I would have 10 people calling me back. I mean, I'm on the phone all day handling inbound calls, and as soon as I get off the phone, I have to go to my voicemail, check the message that came through while I'm on the phone, and call them back. And that cycle went over and over and over again. And that's really why I was dead last in the company, is because all I'm doing is fielding inbound phone calls in an organization that only makes outbound calls. It's kind of crazy, but it's a reality that you can have. Now, some things to consider before you even pick up the phone. And these are really important because when you leave a voicemail, people just think, okay, I'm going to leave a voicemail or I'm going to call, and we're just going to like throw spaghetti on the wall and see what happens. But there's some very important considerations before you pick up the phone. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking about these, and they're really, really crucial. You really need to take these to heart. Number one, we're interrupting them. So you got to understand, people are not sitting by the phone waiting for me to call. They're not. They're watching TV, they're doing laundry, they're driving, they could be doing any number of things, and yet we're interrupting them. So you have to understand that we are, kind of not necessarily a nuisance, but we're an unplanned part of their day. So understand that, and we'll work with that going forward. You need to ask yourself, why shouldn't they just quickly delete it before listening to it? So when you leave a voicemail, you need to ask that question. Why should they even spend more than 2 seconds listening to you before just hitting the delete button? And then the other thing that you need to ask is, why are we really more important than what they're doing at the moment? And you need to ask that in a negative, like in an inverse context, like in a skeptical tone of voice. Like, why are we really more important than what they're doing at the moment? And realistically, the assumption is we're not. So we're going to work from that point, assuming that we're, from the other person's perception or perspective, not more important than what they're doing at the moment. Now, from there, we want to talk about what's working against you. And I remember sitting here just writing these down, thinking about it. I'm like, holy cow. There's a lot of things working against you when you're trying to leave a voicemail. Number one, when somebody checks their voicemail, their goal is just to clear out their new voicemails. Especially if you're like me. I mean, I just don't like seeing that nagging icon on my phone where it says 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever. I want to get those voicemails cleared out just from, just from an organizational perspective. A lot of times checking voicemail is usually just a time filler. So it's like, all right, I'm bored, I'll check my voicemail, I have nothing better to do, I'm just mentally worn out from cold calling, fine, I'll just check it, whatever. And it might be your personal voicemail or whatever, but like, all right, fine, I'm just going to go through it just to change, change what I'm doing and just kill some time. The other thing you need to consider is the phone speaker. Now, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the phone speaker was a big thing, and I was looking at the phone when I first started doing this, and I realized this is the problem. But we're going to talk about that in a second. They're expecting your voicemail to be really, really boring. I mean, really boring. So that's the expectation, but we're going to show you how you can actually get that working for you instead of against you. They presume anyone they don't know is trying to get over on them. And with the amount of spam calls that I get, I really don't think that's an unrealistic perception. They know they're in they know they're in control of all future contact. So there's a little bit of arrogance that they have on their side, even though it might be a subconscious arrogance. But we're going to get that to work for us as well. And they now know your phone number and caller ID. So if you do leave a boring voicemail, they can block you. Or if they see that phone number come through, they can just hit the delete button. Or if you leave a voicemail, they're just going to delete it without even listening to it whatsoever. So it sounds like there's a lot working against you. And I know some of you guys are thinking, well, how are you supposed to possibly leave a voicemail that gets a 50% callback rate if all these things are working against you? Well, we're going to talk about that, and it's totally possible, and we're going to get actually some of these things, we're going to flip on their head, and we're going to get them to work for us. So how do I overcome this? Well, there's a 4-step process. We're going to talk about the first 3 seconds, the 3 to 10 seconds of the voicemail, and we're going to teach them we're going to talk about how to keep them off base. But my favorite is we're going to wrap this up talking about the chum. Now, some considerations in the first 3 seconds. Now, these are some things you want to consider before you even leave the voicemail on what we need to consider on the first 3 seconds that we're leaving a voicemail. Number 1, the phone speaker is working against you. It just is. So it's a crappy piece of equipment, and they don't really spend a whole lot of time designing it or making it or investing in the phone. So you want to ask, where was it made? What poor third world country was this phone speaker outsourced to? You want to ask, how much does it cost to make? I mean, I'm guessing 10 cents, a quarter, and it can't be really much. I mean, we're not talking about Bose speakers in your phone. So they're built by the lowest bidder. So just understand it's going to be really low. And then how old was the child who assembled it? I remember I asked myself that question. Are they 4 years old or 6 years old? Because it's one of the two. You know there's child labor involved, no matter what the company tells you. But just understand that you have these things working against you. So you might be talking, in a certain way in person, but when they're listening on the phone, just understand this cheap phone speaker is not going to carry through the things that you want it to carry through. It's going to be working against you. And in the end, how does it impact how your voice is carried? So just think about that as we go forward. Now, in addition to that, we're going to touch on the fact that people are oppositional by nature. So, as we leave the voicemail, we can't assume that people are just going to believe us or agree with us or be on board with us from the jump. We want to ask, what are people thinking when they're checking their voicemail? So, what's going through their mind? Give some thought to, what's going through their mind, what they're doing at that moment. Are they brushing their teeth? Are they watching TV? Are they driving? Hopefully not. I mean, it could be any number of things. And in the end, why should they just delete your message? And just presume that they're going to. So we need to come to a point of just saying, what can we do to make sure they don't delete this message, as opposed to assuming that people are actually going to listen to it. Now, when people are listening to your voicemail, especially in the beginning, they're generally on autopilot. So they're kind of like a zombie. They're comatose. They're just going through the motions, but you don't really have their full attention. So it's crucial to deliver a near perfect message. Now, I know that's a high bar, but think about all the stuff we talked about where things are working against you. It's important when you leave this message that you really need to work on it. So you're going to start with a particular message and the design that we're going to talk about, but then it's really important to make sure that it's perfect, whether it's tone of voice or words or anything, energy level. It has to be, you have to be on your A game. And if you're not on your A game, it's better not even to make the call. But in the end, that choice of words is paramount. And I will tell you this, I left a voicemail and I had the things down and pretty much down. And I wasn't getting 50%. I was getting, I don't know, a decent percent, but it wasn't anywhere near 50. And I made a change in one word. So I remember I was saying, you know, we have this great program, but then I realized that, and nobody ever taught me this. I kind of realized it at just one moment, but I realized that there's 3 levels where you can say great. There's a really excited level, there's a medium level, and then there's a dull level. And if you say great at a high level, it sounds really fake and artificial. If you say it in the middle, it sounds about right, but it's kind of neutral. There's no energy behind it. And if you say it low, great, then, you know, I wonder if you're dead. Like, are you real? Like, are you an AI voice program or whatever? I mean, it doesn't work. So I ended up going and looking through a thesaurus of all things, and I was trying to find a word that worked really well on the high level, like, so really excited, but yet it wouldn't work in the middle or low level. And I found one word that just worked perfectly for that, and or at least it seemed to work perfectly, and that was the word fantastic. So if I say fantastic, it belongs up there. You should be excited when you say it. If I say, yeah, that's fantastic, then it doesn't sound like you're being honest. Like, who says, oh, fantastic, and they're just kind of ho-hum about it? Or you can say, yeah, it's fantastic, and you're low. Then it sounds like you're dead. You're officially dead. Like, they're going to call the cops on you, that kind of dead. And so I put that into the message, and I changed it, and immediately my response rate went up to just about 50% off one change of word. So it's important as you go through this to really determine what words are working for you, what words you're delivering really well, where your energy level is, and are there any other parts of this message that you can improve upon? Because that's going to be important. You're going to have to be 100% sold on every part of this message you're leaving, but when you do it, the results can be amazing. Now, the first 3 seconds of the voicemail, the goal of this is to keep their finger off the delete button. I mean, that's really the goal of it. So they're going to be sitting here in the first 3 seconds, and if it's not on point, they're going to assume that there's no reason to listen to the rest of the message, and they're going to hit that delete button. So your goal is to keep that finger or thumb off that delete button. Simply put, that is the main goal. And you want to get them to listen for 5 to 10 more seconds. That's it. I mean, that's really what you're looking for, is just to get them to keep listening and not hit delete. So to do that, you need to avoid being monotone, which it sounds dumb. Like, of course you're going to avoid being monotone, but if you're leaving, let's say, 10 messages, the first one's going to be your best one, and then 8, 9, and 10, you're going to have a tendency to be monotone. So you really need to be on top of that and make sure that you're not being monotone. If that means not making the phone call, then so be it. Give yourself a mental break, but you need to be ready on each call. And you need a defibrillator. Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit. This is a key part of it, and it will absolutely, it'll absolutely make sure that you're successful on these first 3 seconds. And in the end, you want to ask yourself this overriding question. And this just really applies to everything you do in this first 3 seconds. Why shouldn't they just hit the delete button? I mean, presume they're going to. And then think about what are the things that you're doing that are going to make them not do it. And if you can't have an answer, if you just say, why shouldn't they just hit the delete button? And your answer is, I don't know, they're not going to deliver it. They're not going to listen to your message, because even you don't have a reason for them to do it. They're just going to hit delete. So you really need to think about, as we go through this, why shouldn't they just hit the delete button? And if you're doing things the right way, you'll have a solid answer for this. All right, so let's talk about this defibrillator. So when I say defibrillator, what I mean is this, is that I realize that these people are probably not, if they're anything like me, they're probably not going to be listening to the voicemail. So I need to shock them. So I have this vision of the defibrillator, and I'm like, I need to, you have somebody who's like a dead body, and I need to take those little paddles where they hit clear and then bang, shock them out. And so one of the things that I quickly realized is that I needed to get these people off the autopilot. They're sitting here in a subconscious state, like mindlessly hitting the delete button. I need to get them off of that. So one of the things that I quickly realized, I wasn't going to deliver any content, but I just need to get my voice really high. They're going to listen to the message, and one of the presumptions, everybody's going to leave the voicemail at the same volume level and the same cadence, and I'm going to do something very different. So I would go, instead of going, hey, this is Matt Halsey, it's so-and-so, I would say, hey, and I'd really get my voice loud. And the first time I did this, it was crazy because I saw all these people in the call center just all of a sudden look at me because I'm like almost yelling in this call center. And then I realized, oh, geez, that's kind of weird. But then I'm like, I need to do this because what I need to do is I need to get that autopilot off. And when you do that really loud, what you're going to do is get somebody's conscious attention. The autopilot in their head is going to switch off, and they're going to actually listen to you. So in order to get the first 3 seconds, the first thing you need to do, and it's not about content, there's no words that you need to be super specific about, but you just need to get them shocked. You need to basically do something that's just kind of a little bit crazy. In my thing, it was about really just jumping the volume level really high right off the bat. Now, I'm not going to do that the whole message, but for the first second or two, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And what happened is all of a sudden they realized, what is going on with this guy? Why is this guy being so loud and almost screaming for the first second or two? But now I got their attention, so I'm not going to keep them on that point and think that, okay, I'm a crazy guy because I'm leaving a 30-second voicemail screaming the whole time. But just for the first second or two, I'm going to do it, and I got their autopilot off. And now I got them to listen for a few more seconds. So for the first 3 to 10 seconds, at this point, we have a similar goal, is we want to keep their finger off the delete button. Again, it's a little parlor trick to get them to listen a little bit further, but if I'm not doing anything substantively to really strategically keep them interested, then they're going to delete that message. So my goal from the 3rd second to the 10th second is, again, to keep their finger off of the delete button, and as well as to get them off autopilot. Now, I got them off autopilot for the first 3 seconds. The next thing that is going to happen if I don't do things successfully, that subconscious zombie autopilot is going to come back and take over the message. And what that zombie autopilot does is it's really good at deleting messages. So we need to make sure that that thing does not come back. And in the end, the goal here is really simple, is I want to get them listening for another 5 to 10 more seconds. It's really as simple as that. Now, from here, what we're going to do in this 3 to 10 seconds is we want to purposely vary your vocal tone. So again, the first 3 seconds we got them off, just shocking them. The next 3 to 10 seconds, that subconscious mind is going to try to establish a pattern and it can recognize. Once it establishes a pattern, it jumps in and deletes the message. So it's like a jet fighter when it's trying to lock onto its target. Once it's locked on, you're dead. It's dead. You're done. There's nothing else you can do. But what we're going to do is juke it so much. We're going to vary our vocal tone so much that it can't quite lock in and establish a pattern yet. So in this first 3 to 10 seconds, you want to state your intention, but you don't want it to be sales related. Now, the subconscious mind is going to expect you to say, hey, this is Matt. I'm with sales company A, and I have a product B. And once it's at that point, then it can establish a pattern, and they're probably going to delete the message. So you want to state your intention. Now, initially, when I first did this, my intention wasn't to sell people, and it really wasn't. So what I'm going to tell you isn't some ruse. It was just me being honest. I didn't know my target market. I didn't know what they were like. And realistically, I didn't know the end of the person. Even if I knew generally later on what most people were like, I didn't know what this person was like. So my intention wasn't to try to sell them or to try to get a sales call or an appointment, but my intention was simply to, could be any number of things. I was surveying people. I'm just calling back. Somebody asked me to call back. It could be any number of things. So if I was given a new lead, by my boss or whatever, I'd make the cursory call, but realistically, I have so many calls coming in, I really didn't care about those leads all that much. So I'm just calling as a favor. My boss asked me to call you, and just find out what's going on. But the idea is to really let them know, to establish, at least in the beginning, that my intention is not going to be matched up with every other salesperson calling them back. I'm going to be the only person not calling them back with something sales-related in mind. And from here, you really need to remain vigilant for being monotone. Again, you're coming off the defibrillator. You need to make sure that you're not just, kind of going through the motions and being monotone. You need to be 100% engaged in what you're doing at this point, or you might as well just not even make the phone call. I mean, it's as simple as that. Go for a walk, talk to your friend. It could be pet your dog. It could be a number of different things, but you need to make sure that you're not being monotone. And from here, the point is, you're going to be in a fight with that autopilot. So the whole point, again, you're going to vary your vocal tone. Hi, my name is Matt. I'm with so-and-so here. I'm just calling. Actually, my boss asked me just to call. I know you had asked for some information about this. I don't really have a whole lot of time to talk today, but whatever it is, it's not, again, this isn't going to be a long soliloquy. It's generally about 5 seconds, 5 to 7 seconds that you're doing this. But what you really want to do is vary your vocal tone. You want to be interested a little bit, and then, well, I'm not really super interested in kind of the way that you're establishing your vocal tone. But the whole idea behind this is you want to be different than every other person that's leaving a message. I mean, that's the overriding concept here, because we don't want that subconscious mind to establish a pattern, identify you, and associate you with every other salesperson, and treat you like they treat all the other salespeople. Now, the next step on this, and this is, again, we're only dealing with, I don't know, we're probably 5 to 10 seconds, maybe not 5, we're probably 7 to 10 seconds in the voicemail at this point. So we're pretty much starting off, is we want to keep them off base. And again, the idea here is to keep the subconscious mind from establishing a pattern. So the goals here are, again, keep the autopilot from taking over. And I've said this 3 times in a row, because the entire message, this autopilot's in the background, and it's kicking and screaming. It's like a dog being held back from a cheeseburger. It just really wants to get in there and delete the message. And it's going to do everything possible to get in there. So the minute you're not on your game, or you're being monotone and you're allowing it to establish a pattern, it's going to jump in there and delete that message. So again, we want to keep that autopilot from taking over. And you got to understand, this is an extremely vigilant subconscious level that they have inside of them. So we need to be on our game, on point, every single second, every single word. The goal in this is to spike curiosity. And so what I mean by that is that we want to get them, when we're talking about keeping them off base, we want to really get them curious about something, to really get them wondering and not being able to tie off a loose end on what we're about and how we're different. It could be any number of things. But if we're basically having a pattern, or we're not adhering to the same pattern as all the other salespeople, they're going to wonder why we're not. And so we really want to spike curiosity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But in the end, we want to give them a reason to pay attention. So this is the one area where we're actually going to mix some logic into what we're doing. But you want to give them some logical reason to pay attention, to mix with all the subconscious things that we're talking about. All right, so when we're talking about keeping them off base, we want to ask, what is their real problem? So when I was first doing this, I worked for an online college, or a college with an online modality. That's what we always said. It was true. And the problem wasn't that it wasn't school. That wasn't the problem. The real problem that I discovered, it wasn't a degree, or it wasn't making more money. I mean, those are all things that are really nice. Most of the people that I worked with had kids. And the real problem is that they realized they were raising kids. They didn't have a college degree. They were telling them they needed to go to college, and that they were viewing themselves as a potential hypocrite. So the real problem was like beating themselves up about being a hypocrite. So that was one of the real problems. And in addition to that, it was just their real problem is they didn't believe that they could actually do it. You have 3 kids running around. How are you possibly going to go to school and finish your degree without taking 30 years to do so, and just bankrupting yourself in the process? So those are really the 2 real problems that I understood. It had nothing to do with school. It had to do with how they looked at themselves. And, really they kind of had a defeatist mindset. They just beat themselves up, and they were kind of pessimists in a respect. So I knew those were the 2 real problems that I had to deal with. You have to ask them, you have to really ask yourself, what's in it for me? Like when you're leaving this message, why should they listen? This is where the logic comes into it. So you want to be able to offer them something tangible based off of a real problem. So, as I left the message, I'd say I specifically work with parents and show them how they could actually complete their college degree in a short period of time, no matter how long it's been since they've been in school, how much doubt they have in themselves, and I literally am going to be your Sherpa. And it was like those, the Sherpas that climb mountains. I'm going to show you how to get to the peak of the mountain when you don't know what you're doing, how to get there, and you don't believe in yourself. And so I'd be hitting on this real problem. And that's why you have to identify the real problem, is because the next step is asking what's in it for me and figuring, like, what are you going to be, what's in it for them to keep asking. So when you're just basically nailing this problem right off the bat, being able to talk to it from the beginning is important, because most of the people that I knew were calling were talking about the degree or the program or the college being the reason that they would call back, but it wasn't about that. It was about this shame and this guilt and this disbelief in yourself. And so I would end up really wanting to do that. I want to basically talk to them about what's in it for them and having them understand that I really get what they're going through. And so they start to feel hope for a minute, and they think, oh, this is really great. But in the back of their mind, they're still probably thinking this could be a sales call. So there's still that lurking subconscious presumption. And this is where I call my shot. And this is really important. This is where I'm going to specifically mention something that I know that is bothering them in detail without them ever having to tell me. And so I'll literally just talk to them about, the last thing you want to do, and this is what I knew from my population, the last thing that you want to do is to basically leave your 3 kids with a total stranger so you can run across town, eat drive-through fast food, and to race across campus to go into a class where everybody else is 20 years younger than you, and you're wondering why you're there, you don't have anything in common with them, and you're wondering why their kids are without their mom. And that was going through every one of their minds at the time. And immediately it's like, whoa, this is unbelievable. This guy totally gets me. And you're leaving this very detailed, short description of what they're going through that nobody else is going to understand. They're going to wonder, how the heck does this guy possibly understand what I'm going through? And that's really where that curiosity gets spiked. And from here, now that we have them in the palm of our hand, at least for a moment, we want to talk about urgency and to say, listen, we have some opportunities for you, but you need to call me back as soon as possible. And it could be whatever urgency is relevant to you. It could be that you're working with X number of people, you're doing it for a certain period of time. For me, my college, you could sign up whenever you want and apply for them whenever you want. But for me, I had X amount of people that I was going to decide to work with every week. And if you weren't in that number, you weren't going to work with me. So I would let them know I have 3 people left that I'm going to be working with this week, or 1 person, or 4 people, whatever it was the number. But you need to call me back before somebody else fills that spot. And so the idea is that you have a little bit of a takeaway there. And this is what we call in the push-pull. And so the idea is everything positive we say where we offer something to them as hope or a possibility, we want to basically retract back and say, listen, it's important that you call in the next, but if you don't, it's possible that you're going to call me and there's not going to be a spot available for you. So, and you're going to have to go to you're going to have to go work with somebody else. So the idea is that every time I say something positive, I'm going to pull back. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to show you how you can actually go to school without any money out of pocket. But if you don't, I need to get a call back within the next 12 hours. Otherwise, this option won't be available to you. So anytime you're saying something where you're offering something positive, you need to basically pull back and show them that that opportunity won't be available under certain circumstances. And you can do this multiple times. I generally did it twice within the voicemail, but you can do it whatever amount of time that you feel you're on your A game. And at the end of this section, you want to disqualify them. And so one of the things that I would always say was, and I'd say this because this is how I was thinking. I'd say, but now that I think about it, I don't even know you, so I'm not even sure if you would be able to be eligible for what I'm doing. And so the idea is it's almost like you're changing your mind mid-sentence. And I would say it very matter-of-factly, and it was just how I was thinking. And so the idea is I'm going to offer it to them, but it's like now I'm almost considering whether I should just pull the offer from the table entirely. And so the idea is that they know that when they call me back after disqualifying, that this option, that they're not going to get a sales call. In other words, the presumption is that they're going to have to kind of try to talk me into it a little bit. And this is very different than qualifying your customer. In sales, we're taught to qualify our customer because we need to make sure that they're eligible for what we're selling. But people see that as a hint that there's going to be like a closing or a sales pitch being made to them, and they try to avoid that. But when you disqualify them, they know that when they call back, there's not going to be a sales pitch, and realistically, they're starting from a point where they're not going to be even offered this opportunity. So we're thinking about what's in it for them. We know what their real problem is. We're calling our shot with specificity. We're putting a timetable on what they need to do, and everything positive that we talk about, we're going to pull back and just let them know that it's not universally available. They can't just call in your time frame and get it. And in the end, we're almost changing our mind into saying, well, now that I think about it, I might not even be able to offer this to you entirely, but you need to call me back anyway, and I'll let you know if this will work for you. But the idea is, the assumption is that the store's closed and it's out of stock. So, but you need to call quick before it runs out of stock. And the idea here is you're establishing scarcity in the sense that they got to get in before it's too late. Now, my favorite part of this is what I call the chum. And we're going to get into why we call that the chum in a minute. But the whole goal here is we want to make it impossible for them not to call you. And this is really the genius in this formula. We want to get them to a point where they literally cannot not call us back. Like it's going to be bugging them. So the reason I call it the chum is because it's like one of those nature shows. When they're trying to get a shark, they throw bloody fish guts in the water, and that's what they call chum. And it basically attracts sharks. They have no choice. They're going to follow that scent to the boat. It's not even a choice. You're just going to see, you throw chum in the water, you're going to see sharks. It's just that simple. So with the chum, we want to leave an impossibly tempting loose end. What I mean by that is people always have a need in their own mind to tie up a loose end with what they're doing. They want to square things off. They want to have a full understanding. It's the reason why you look at TV shows and they always leave a cliffhanger at the end. They always want to get you a reason to watch the next season. To go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they left it there. What's going to happen here? This sucks. Oh my gosh, it's driving me crazy. But you want to do that, leaving that loose end. It's the same reason when you listen to a radio show, a lot of times they call them teases in the industry. They'll actually, bring up something amazing like, hey, we know where so-and-so is going to sign with their NFL team or whatever it is, or who, this celebrity just started dating somebody new. Who they started dating? Well, we'll tell you on the other side of this commercial break. And so the idea is they want you listening to the commercials so their advertisers actually get some value to what they're doing. But the idea is you want to leave an impossibly tempting loose end that they feel like they have to tie. All of us have to do that. All of us need to have order in their life. It's this subconscious sense of order to some degree. And we all have it in different areas of our life, but we want to leave that impossibly tempting loose end. Now, I gave you a little a hint there. So one of the things that I like to do, and there's probably a number of ways you can leave chum, but my favorite one to do is we want to hang up mid-sentence. What do I mean by that? Well, so we talked about the first 3 seconds. We have the defibrillator. We're getting their autopilot off. Hey, this is Matt. There's something really crazy and energetic. It's real, full, realistic, legit energy. Get to the next 3 seconds. We just talk about, really we want to keep varying our vocal tone so they can't really lock into us. And then we get to the content part of it. We want to understand what's in it for them. Basically, we call it a shot. we mention urgency, we have push-pull, and then we disqualify them. At the very end, one of the things I'll do is I'll start off with the chum is I'll leave my name and information. I'll say, you can call me back at boom, boom, boom. This is my number. And then I want to do what I call a Columbo, which is meaning I'll leave one extra thing at the very end. And Columbo is this old show. I think it was even before I was born. But the idea is he would basically question this suspect, and he'd basically go, okay, I'm going to leave the room. And so he's walking out of the room, and the guy basically lowers his defenses, and then Columbo would turn around and he would ask him a question. But now he's got the guy with no defenses up, and he would always get the answer. So what we want to do is say, hey, we're going to, this is my name and number, and we're almost getting the sense of like the voicemail's over, and they can kind of like, keep their defenses fully down. They're kind of programming themselves that the voicemail over, and go, oh, one other thing. When you call, and this is why it's important that you leave your number before you do this. When you do that, one last thing is, I have this really cool thing that we just got. You could, whatever it is, it's going to be different for every single person, but I got one other thing that I have for you. It's an absolute must thing, a must you have. It's an absolute must do or must hear or whatever it is. I have one other bonus thing that I want to talk. One other thing that I want to talk to you about. This thing just came online, and it could be whatever it is for your industry. For me, I always added it as something that I forgot to tell them in the voicemail. So I have one other really cool thing that I can get for you. And so when you call me, I'm going to show you exactly how to, and then bang, I would hang up. But I didn't hang up in the sense of like you can tell that I was hanging up. It's almost like the phone got disconnected. And so immediately they're like, if you do everything right, you're getting their interest, they have a ton of curiosity, they have a reason to call you, and then you're giving them one other thing that you just can't wait to tell them about. I mean, this is where your energy is probably higher than it is the entire voicemail, and then you hang up mid-sentence. And it's like their assumption is, man, this guy, the phone got cut off. I can't believe I missed this. And what are they going to do? They have to tie off that loose end, and in order to do that, they have to call you back. It's that simple. And I can't tell you how important this hang up mid-sentence is. I mean, we're not talking about hang up after a sentence. We're talking about in the middle of a word sentence. Like, I have this really cool thing. I'm going to show you exactly how you can get basically 1/3 of your degree done in less than 6 months. And then I'd hang up. And they're going to call back. I mean, they just did over and over and over again. And the first thing they would do when they call back is say, hey, I listened to your voicemail. I think you got cut off. You were talking about something about getting, 1/3 of my degree done. And now they're at a point where they're calling me up mid-sale. Like the conversation is where it would be in a mid-sales call. And they're ready to go. Like they're excited, but the reason they called, at the very least it's plausible deniability, is to get that loose end tied off in their head. So that's basically how we, so that's basically how we created this voicemail that gets a 50% callback rate. The idea is that in the end, we have all these things working against us. We have an autopilot that just wants to hang up the call, but we have 4 different areas on what we're doing to actually get them to call back. One, we're basically electrocuting the autopilot, but this thing is like a zombie. It's going to get back up. It's like a Terminator. It's going to get back up. So we got the first 3 seconds taken care of. The 3 to 10 seconds, the idea is to basically keep that autopilot from being able to lock onto us. We vary our vocal tone. It really doesn't matter what you say, but you just need to vary the vocal tone. Hi, this is Matt, and so, and up and down, and up and down. It's almost like an Irish limerick. From there, we move on to the content. We think about what's in it for them. What is their real problem? It's not the product. It's not the cost. It's nothing that you can write on paper, but it's always emotional and ego-driven. And then we're going to call our shot. We're going to really show that we're like psychic and that we understand them before they've even said a word to us. And that's going to really drive curiosity and make them really wonder man, this guy must be really different, and he's the only person like this. I really need to talk to this guy. We're going to mention urgency. We're going to basically get to a point where they have a time frame where they need to call us back, and it's not about us, but it's about them. From there, we're going to do push-pull. Every time we positively say something that really appeals to them, we're going to pull back on it and, you know, in a sense, just establish some scarcity in there. And then from there, we're going to disqualify them, which is almost like us changing our mind mid-call and mid-voicemail, which is really what you should be doing. Because you really should be thinking, wow, this person isn't the end-all, be-all. Maybe they're not. Maybe they call, and maybe they're just going to be a train wreck. Maybe they're not eligible. Maybe they're just not a good fit for me. Maybe they're a good fit for my company, but I don't want to work for them, you know, at that point. And then really delivering that sense of skepticism. And then at the last point, you start off, you leave your contact information as if you're ending the voicemail. And then from there, you go, oh, I almost forgot this. I have this really great thing, and this is where you're going to leave some superpower that you have. So for me, it was like, I'm going to show you how to get your degree, a third of your degree done in less than 6 months. And, you know, or it could be any number of things. You know, and when you do that, I'm also going to show you, bang, and then you hang up the phone. But you really need to have it mid-sentence. So it's almost like you have your finger on the disconnect button when you're talking, and then you just, mid-sentence, you just, boom, hit the button right off the bat. And then from there, if you're doing it right. Now, in the beginning, you're not going to get a 50% callback rate. And if you do, I need to hear about it because that's awesome. But it's going to start off, you're going to get a definite increase in your callback rate. But as you start to really iron out the words you use and the content and the framework and just getting every single thing on point. I mean, every single word should be designed and optimized. And getting the framework down and getting your energy into it, making sure there's no monotone, and make sure you are on your A game every single second of every single voicemail that you leave. You're going to start to really see the difference. And as you start to really understand your prospects more and you're paying attention to what they're telling you on the phone and some insights that they give you, you can even add that on there. Now, the last thing that we didn't really talk about is that over time, you're going to have this, what I thought was this perfect voicemail message. I mean, you know, I'm popping 50% people calling me back, and it's great, but it's not always going to be 50% because our mind's going to kind of get attuned to it, and this autopilot that we have inside of ourselves is going to really subtly, and it's going to sneak up on you, is really get monotone. And so you really need to, you know, sometimes you might need to change a word just so it's different. Other times you just need to be very, very attuned to the fact that this monotone is going to try to sneak up on you. But when you do this over time, I'm telling you, it's going to blow your mind away. And you're going to get so many phone calls that you can't even call them back. Like you're in your voicemail and you're like, it's the end of the day and you're like, oh my gosh, there's like 4 people I haven't even called back yet. And meanwhile, that's a problem, right? That's a real good problem to have. Whereas everybody else around you is just killing to get somebody to even talk to. So that's what you do to actually get people calling you back. In our next call, we're going to talk about how to actually take these calls you're getting and convert them to customers, not by selling them, but by using some really high-level psychology. Now, but don't worry about that. It's simple to use. It's high-level psychology, but it's some of the easiest things to use, things that you see and do every single day.